this is a movement of people who are, I like to say, in the second half of their lives, who are rewriting the script of what life can look like in this new kind of longevity era.
Welcome to Thought Sparks. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and enjoy.
Well, hello, everyone. Rita McGrath here with our weekly Thought Sparks podcast. And I am absolutely delighted to be meeting and talking about Michael Clinton's new book. It's called A Longevity Nation. And I'll give away the lead. It's one of the biggest inflection points that nobody's actually paying much attention to, which is that people are having longer, healthier, richer lives for far longer than any other time in human history. And he's written a book to kind of give us some insight into what that might look like. So welcome, Michael.
Rita, thank you for having me. Great to be with you and talk about my favorite subject.
I love talking to people about their favorite subjects, but let's talk about you for a minute. So as I have it here, though, the former president and publishing director of Hearst Magazines, now you're a media advisor to Hearst CEO, and your just previous book, which we never got around to having you on the podcast about, was Roar, which was really about how people can take advantage of this, future thinking life that we've got. So how did you get, give us a little bit of your backstory and how you got to this situation.
Yeah, no, thanks. I was, as you mentioned, the president and publishing director of Hearst Magazines. And, I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers know some of our magazines. We launched Oprah's Magazine and Food Network and Esquire and many, many others. And I was about ready to sort of wrap up what was a 40-year great career. I was just kind of ready to do my next thing. And everyone kept saying to me, "Oh, you're going to retire." And I thought, well, no, I'm going to actually leave this job because it was a great job and a great career. And I'm going to go off and do my next thing. So in my language, I'm said I'm going to rewire and do my next chapter. And anyway, people, I found that a lot of people were sort of focused on this retirement thing. And, if you are 65 and healthy today, you may live another 30 years. So that's a lot. That's a whole second act, second life that you can reboot and start a new career, launch a business, go back to school, get new relationships, all those kind of things. So I was very agitated by all of this. And I said to myself, I need to find more people like me who are ready to sort of reboot. And anyway, it turned into this idea for a book called Roar into the Second Half of Your Life, which I ended up writing during COVID because we all had a lot of time on our hands, if you recall, in terms of being stuck at home. And I found an agent, and we had 3 offers, and we went with Simon & Schuster, and it was a great big hit. And it turned into a business now and spawned a whole new joint venture with Hearst and the new book. And anyway, we call this The Awakening of the New Longevity, which we can talk a bit more about. But so I would say it was serendipity in many ways, but it came out of this personal question of why are people thinking about shutting down at 65 when you should be thinking about rebooting at 65 in our world and culture today.
And so many people are still healthy and happy and have lots of connections and if it's not that retirement's a bad thing if that's what you want, but for a lot of us it's sort of like we're retired to do what?
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting because retirement is really a false construct. Mm-hmm. 100 years ago, life expectancy was 62. People basically worked until they died. I mean, that was sort of retirement was a government construct with Social Security in 1935. And human beings are meant to have purpose and engagement and meaning. So just shutting down, doesn't work any longer. Think about this. 100 years ago, there were 7 million people in this country who were 65 or over. Today, there are 62 million.
Whoa.
Yeah, growing to 80 million in the next decade. And yeah, to your point, they're healthier, they're living longer. The amazing developments in medicine through technology and AI is coming through the pipeline. The whole world is going through a framework. In the early 2030s, there'll be more people 65 and over in the United States than under 18.
Mm.
And you probably know that birth rates are down in 150 countries. And
Whoops.
so this is a very long-term trend
Mm-hmm.
of the changing demographic, the aging, if you will, of the world. But it is to your point, it's a very, very different kind of 65 plus year old than previous generations.
Mhm. Well, one of the things that I think is sort of super interesting about the book is you actually dive into these very specific lives people are living who have embraced this. You know, they're doing all kinds of things. You yourself, you run marathons. You've got a vineyard in Argentina. You get all these really interesting things that you personally are doing. And then the book, now, what do you call them? You call them Reimagineers?
Reimagineers, yeah.
Reimagineers, right?
Yeah. So two parts on that. You know, we call the people sort of the front runners, the age innovators who are redefining the script for the second half. And, you know, this is a social movement, much like other social movements in the past, whether it was the women's movement or civil rights or LGBTQ. This is a movement of people who are, I like to say, in the second half of their lives, who are rewriting the script of what life can look like in this new kind of longevity era. And you know, the 100-year life will become more and more normalized in years to come. And so the reimagineers are the people. I was really interested in talking to people, not who were bankers and became consultants in banking, but I was interested in people who had a massive reinvention.
Mm.
So just recently, I was at a graduation for a friend. A true reimagineer. She just graduated from veterinary school at the age of 60.
Whoa.
And yeah, and she said, you know, I can be a veterinarian for 20 years. You know, you don't have to think of it in the context of a 40-year career or the build of a career that some of us may have had. And so I was interested in people who are doing a complete reimagination in some way, shape, or form in their life. And that was, we have our website is roarforward.com. That's our company, Roar Forward. We put all of our reimagineers inspirational stories on a tab on the site. And we also have a free monthly newsletter, which is an aside. But with the new book, Longevity Nation, I wanted to go out and interview. I ultimately interviewed 70 reimagineers, people who are building the roadmap, doctors, technologists, higher education, urban planners, who are getting the world ready for the 100-year life, the longer life cycle globally. And so they're reimagineers in another form because they're the ones who are, and we can talk about any of those particular verticals, but they're the ones who are creating the framework for what our life will look like as we move into this new era.
Well, and it really strikes me that the potential here is to completely reimagine what human thriving really looks like. You know, I think many of our constructs are really drawn from this kind of male life cycle, 1950s or thereabouts era of what a career is. You know, so in your 20s, you get going. In your 30s, you're sort of sorted into also rans and high potentials. And in your 40s, you're kind of being groomed to take the reins of power. In your 50s, you have a midlife crisis, you have a blonde and a Corvette, and then in your 60s, you're handing on to the next generation. And what your book is beginning to explore is that makes no sense anymore. You know, if you retire at 65 and you've got 30 or 40 more years to go, that's just not that bucket of things doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, we're living in 20th century constructs for a 21st century life. And therein lies the disruption and the recast that we need. I have the good fortune of being on the Stanford University Center on Longevity board. And our founder, Dr. Laura Carstensen,
He
who
wrote that forward, right? For the
wrote
book.
forward,
Yeah.
yeah. And Laura, as I call her, one of the OGs of the movement, because she started the center, which is the globally premier center on research and studying this phenomenon and its impact on lives and workplace and all that you talk about. And she started this over 20 years ago. And the Stanford did a great project called the New Map of Life, which people can access on the web. And it really is taking a look at what is the new construct going to look like in this new era in the second half of life? What is the new construct going to look like in 100-year life? And today's 5-year-old, according to many studies, and I reference this in the book, has a 50% chance to live to be 100. So some of us may get there, but the next generations, this will be more and more their lifespan. And of course, the goal is to be healthy and well, and the goal is to have enough financial security to fund a 100-year life and all of the other components. But yeah, we need to build new pathways, new structures, new societal framework to accommodate this changing phenomenon in the world.
Yeah. And do you see, you mentioned L'Oreal in the book. Do you see very many companies taking this seriously? I mean, I think, I hear a lot of buzz in the corporate world right now about, all these baby boomers are retiring, lose out on all these tacit skills, and all these people are leaving the workplace. And then at the same time, there's this vacancy of entry at the entry level jobs and a lot of young people not being brought in. And it just seems to be this really fundamental dislocation in the way we traditionally thought about career progress and who's running the show at what period. And do you see very many companies that are taking this seriously?
It's a great question, and you framed that beautifully, by the way. The answer is not enough. I'll use L'Oreal as my poster child, as I often do. They have a global initiative called L'Oreal for All Generations. And you probably know that there are 5 generations in the workplace right now.
Of course.
And L'Oreal's very, very intentional on maintaining their 50-plus-year-old workforce for upskilling, reskilling, promoting, moving them into different job experiences, because they value and see the wisdom, the experience, the knowledge that goes with that particular individual who's, has seasoning, as I like to say, has been through 4 recessions and knows how to deal with it, right? Or fast decision making because you can cut through. That being said, they're also very conscious of professional development on the other end. And so they are one of the rare exceptions that are focused on this. You referenced something with those, quote, boomers who are choosing to leave I like to say their first careers or their companies. There is a huge talent drain that is right behind them in terms of the senior and mid to senior level positions that they held. That's not something that a young professional can fill because they haven't had the experience yet of their professional life. So the companies, the progressive, innovative companies are beginning to realize they need to retain their older employers longer, and they need to retain them in maybe not in the same kind of full-time job construct. There are many, many innovative models now around the world that are emerging in Singapore and in Denmark and in the EU. One of the great examples that I write about in the book is called Flex 58, where at 58 years old, you can move from a full-time job to let's call it a part-time role in the company. Maybe it's a different kind of job, but they continue to keep you on your full pension benefit until you retire. And so that is a great model as an example. In Singapore, the government will pay a company an 8% stipend if they hire someone 55 plus. So there are new government policies, there are new frameworks, new kinds of work models that are emerging that are really innovative, and I think we'll see more of that for sure happening in the next as time goes on and the world continues to live longer.
Super. So for those of you just joining us, my guest this week is Michael Clinton, author of Roar and his new book, Longevity Nation, where he's really looking at the workforce and personal implications of 100-year lives, of reinventing yourself, of retirement, like what fear is that? So one of the things that kind of struck me as I was reading your book was, on the one hand, we've got all that stuff about, ageism and in Silicon Valley and what's the old line? Never trust anybody over 30. That was like decades ago. And then you've got the sort of ageism that is this trope, right? And yet your book, you're talking about these people are trying all the kinds of new things. They've economic heft, they've got skills, they've got experience, they're sought after. So how do you square those two stories?
Yeah. It's interesting when I've traveled around the world and I did a lot of travel for this book. And when you go to Asia, you see the very different view that the Asian cultures have about the older cohort, if you will. The U.S. in particular, we're cloaked in ageism because we've always been a youth culture orientation. But by the way, the youth culture was created for the boomers. Prior to the boomer generation, there was no such thing as a congealed youth culture. It was created, and think about MTV and Rolling Stone and Nike and all of the brands that were born to service that huge population, the biggest population group ever. What happened, though, is that we got fixated on youth, and as these huge numbers moved into later years, they were ignored, culturally, and business-wise. And if you think about this, 35% of our population is now 50 plus. The first millennials turn 50 in 4 years.
Oh, that blows my mind.
That blows everybody's mind. Those precious little millennials. And by the way, that is a generation that's larger than the boomers. So you're going to have in the next decade this steady growth of the 50 plus consumer, 50 plus individual. And as you may know, in the media world, brands traditionally have stopped targeting people at 54. The construct was 25 to 54.
Yeah. Always really probably, because isn't that where all the money is?
Of course. That's the big aha. If you looked at the 50 plus world today in the United States, they spend $8.3 trillion. They would be the third largest country of GDP in the world. So the money, no brand loyalty anymore, fit, healthy generally, the generation is the fittest and healthiest of any prior generation. Lifestyle factors being a big contributor of that. This was the generation that stopped smoking, began the fitness phenomena, started running, started eating better. I always joke and say when I was a kid, my parents smoked, they drank, there was no exercise, and we ate processed foods.
Hey, what's wrong with pepperoni and cheese? Come on.
Yeah, exactly. And now the boomer generation was the first generation that kind of moved out of that construct, right? So they're living, they're much a healthier group in general. But getting back to your core question, the cultural cues are changing in real life ways. When you look, for instance, at the television or movies, the characters that are played, you might be familiar with the new show on Netflix called The Burrows, which I would recommend everyone watch. It is a great blowing up of the tropisms of what it means to be older. You look at Hacks or Matlock, or I always use Helen Mirren. In the past, an actress, over 60 would be playing a doting grandmother, and she plays the badass assassin. So the characters are changing. Images are changing. Oprah's 72. That's what 72 looks like. Martha Stewart's 84. That's what 84 looks like. When we were younger, when we looked at 70-year-olds, it was a very different. So the ageism is being broken down by a lot of the cultural cues and a lot of these age innovators, reimagineers who are really changing what it looks like, and also what the things that they're doing. Which is more important than what they look like, the actual things that they're doing. So we're watching a change. I make the analogy, it's like the women's movement. When the women's movement first began, the women who led that charge began to show what else other women could do. And today, a 25-year-old woman looks around the world and says, I can be anything and do anything. Whereas my mother's generation didn't have those options, as an example. So these real life role models are going to change it for the next generations.
Absolutely. So what were there things that surprised you as you embarked on this research? So you talked to these 70 plus people that were the interviews for the book. And were there things that you thought, I never thought about that way before?
Yeah, the thing that was the biggest headline for me, and as I've gotten to learn more about it, is the convergence of medicine meets technology meets AI. We're living in an extraordinary moment of, how would I call it, golden moment of medical innovation that's manifesting itself in a variety of ways and will create the pathways to what we'll call the 100-year life. So I'll kind of give you three headlines. Um, the emergence of preventative diagnostic tools that we now have at our fingertips. And that can include everything from biomarkers and the testing that is now available to all of us for preventative. It also includes, I'm obsessed with my Aura ring, you know, a wearables that track our metrics and give us cues and clues about our heart rate and our sleep healthiness, and our HRV and our VO2 max, which is a really important and critical measure for our well-being. The VO2 max sends us signals if something's happening to our bodies. And we're just in the early days of all of the diagnostics and wearables that are available to us. So that is going to become more and more a part of tracking our own personal physical well-being. The second thing I would add is the enormous success. Excuse my pup. The enormous
Dogs are part of it, right?
the enormous success of the GLP-1, which is the miracle drug that was originally for diabetes, then it was for weight control. And now many doctors are saying it's really a longevity drug because it is reducing inflammation, improving cardiovascular, improving organ function. It has got the early clinical trials. The GLP-1 is being viewed as really the drug of our lifetime and will continue to evolve. And there are other classes of drugs emerging, like senolytics, which will take out the dead senescent cells in our bodies to let the living, healthier cells live. Metformin is a drug that, once again, not completely proven through clinical trials, but is showing that it slows down the aging process on the cellular level. So, a lot of new drugs are emerging on this front, and now with AI being injected into it, we're going to have drug treatments that we call precision medicine. So you and I may have the same illness, but we will be treated differently because of our individual biologies, and AI will be the driver behind that to find, through trillions of pieces of data, how we may react to a particular treatment for a particular disease. So, I could go on about this, and of course, in the book we write about it. But it's really an amazing moment. And I was not aware of all of the enormous innovation that was happening on this front. It was a beautiful and great discovery in the book.
That's lovely. So how do you see all this affecting careers? I mean, we are at the younger end, right? There's a lot of discussion of tour of duty careers, and that, I mean, the old line, you'd graduate from college, you'd join IBM or Motorola or something, and you'd be there for 40 years, and then you get a gold watch, and off you'd go to Phoenix or something, and play golf. And that model, I think, is, well, if it ever was really the ideal, certainly has evaporated now. And how do you see people building careers these days? Because I get this question all the time from younger people, which is, how do I think about my career? And my typical response is, well, build a career that you can learn from, build lots of different touch points, become competent at something that nobody else can do, really get good at something that you're best in class at and that you can get paid for, and then take that wherever it leads you, because you just don't know what those future structures are going to be. What do you say to the younger people who say, I'm looking at this population of people ahead of me, and is there going to be space for me? How do I even carve out what I need to do?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. First of all, they're going to have a 60-year career. Many of us had a 40-year career in the construct of career. But they're not, they shouldn't be thinking of it in the same way that we thought of career, because to your point, I think it will be a conglomeration of ongoing set of skills that they will develop and have to develop. I always say to people, you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to be open to learning all the new skills of the moment, because that will give you the competitive edge. And a great example of that is in my business. When I was in the publishing business, it was a print business in the first 25 years of my 40-year career, let's call it. And then something happened called digital, which disrupted the entire business. And for those of us who were more senior, if we didn't learn what digital meant and how it was going to impact our business the way it did, we would have been chewed up and spit out. So we were not digital natives. So I in my role, I often used reverse mentors, where I would talk to 20-somethings. The thing that was interesting is while a lot of print people were displaced, the number of jobs that were created for the digital world were 3x. Mm-hmm. So the people who were able to transition through digital knowledge and digital skills were the ones who continued to grow and thrive. And so, of course, now we're in the AI era, and that's the next big wave of learning as much as we can. But I think it is going to be a skills-based world where you will move around to various careers and or industries with your collection of skills that you will take. But yes, I think long gone are the days like my construct, where I spent 40 years in one industry and climbed the ranks. And you may want to climb the ranks, you may want to go lateral, but there's a lot of great thinking that having lateral experiences to build your skills is really going to be the way the future will work. I'm not that I'm a boomer. So when we had the same story when we entered the workplace, there were so many of us, we were competing with each other. There was a deep recession. We couldn't get jobs. We complained, but there were so many new kinds of jobs that were emerged. And I think with the AI world, there would be many, 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 many jobs, new kinds of jobs created that don't exist yet. And so what are those jobs, and how do you tap into them? And so I think skills-based is going to be the future, because I think AI will take care of a lot of tasks. Mm-hmm. So skills are the way to go.
Well, I think it's skills plus judgment. I was at a conference recently, and one of the more senior guys at the conference was saying, yeah, we embraced AI, we make it available to everybody. And over the course of about 6 months, he said what he was struck by was how much more he was benefiting from the use of AI than his younger colleagues. Mm. I thought that was super interesting, because you could use the AI to do a lot of the kind of intellectual grunt work. And then he could use judgment to figure out where it added value, to figure out how it really, created a useful outcome. Whereas his younger colleagues just didn't have that depth of background. And so right. Had to take it kind of at surface level. So how do young people go about building those skills? And I think this is one of the questions for our time, right? I get asked it all the time as a professor. But how do you think about where do you go to learn skills? And one of my hypotheses is it'll be a lot like the movies. When you go to a big Hollywood movie, the first 10 minutes is taken up by this montage of hundreds of companies and their logos. And, you don't get to be a big player in a movie business by climbing some kind of hierarchy. You get there because somebody looked at what you did and said, this is really awesome, and I want that person on my team, and I really want them working on my project. And it's just a really different way of thinking about how value is assessed.
Yeah. It's a great question as well. I think part of it is having your antenna up as to where will the future opportunities be. So I'll give you a great family example. We have a young kid in the family who was graduated from the business school at Case Western University in Cleveland, you're familiar with. And he was interested in supply chain management and logistics. And through his coursework, he saw the big impact that AI will have in that world. And he went on and just completed a master's degree last week at Case on sort of AI meets supply chain management and logistics. And within the academic world, AI is still forming. There's no real expertise yet because there's no expertise anywhere yet. But the faculty there were very ambitious about bringing content into this discussion, and so he wants to be in the supply chain world through the AI. Through the AI applications. And I think that's a really good example. In the book, I tease it out. Remember the movie The Graduate, where the older guy says to the younger guy, plastics, your future is plastics, right? Well, what I say in the book is the future is longevity. So think about this changing demographic in the world, the impact it's going to have on all of our social institutions. There will be enormous opportunities in healthcare, in new forms of urban planning, in new forms of social community. What are the big trends that are out there in the world? Build your skill sets around those new trends. And there are now many programs that are emerging that are tapping into longevity. One of them is Católica University in Lisbon. They do every summer a 2-week course called Longevity Leadership, which is for people in the business world to understand this whole longevity phenomena and take it back to their companies and become the advocates for policy change and for strategic change and for marketing and HR and all the above. And the two women who founded that program, to me, are great visionaries in terms of educating people about this particular skill set. So I think the longevity era is going to create a lot of new job demands for people who understand that world.
Well, and I think one of the things that older people perhaps have that younger people are still building is this self-efficacy, right? The confidence to say, well, if this door closes, that door will open, and I'm not going to, the world will not end because this opportunity didn't come my way or this thing didn't happen. There's a sort of a confidence that you got from a lifetime of having tried stuff, and some of it works and some of it doesn't, and you make your way forward. But I wonder if that gives older people perhaps a bit of an edge when it comes to some of these more unconventional opportunities.
Well, some of the interesting research that I found is that the seasoned employee who has all of this background that you just suggested may in fact be a really important piece of the equation in the AI revolution. In that, I'll use my digital analogy again. When I was in my 50s and the digital world hit, I would rely on younger professionals to sort of give me input and insights. But it was my experience and seasoning that said, well, that's great, but that can't be integrated into our business model. Or that's not something that we would do because it would be too much of an investment with not enough return on the investment, or all of that. You need the seasoned, experienced person to be able to look at it and put it into context for. And there's a lot that's being written now about the investments in AI, and some companies have gone overboard, and the smart companies are sort of thinking, how will this work for our company? How will this give us the competitive advantage internally and externally? And it's generally the senior people who have that perspective, to your point. So we need the freshness of thinking. But I also was teasing, I was just recently speaking at a university, And I was suggesting that no one has AI expertise right now. so, so if someone's telling you they're an expert in AI, it's too new. It's too new. So, but all input is welcome. But it's really the seasoned leader and employee who's going to have the insights as to, can it work for our business model?
So one of the things that I'm very intrigued by is, and I personally am a big fan of Carlota Perez's work on technical social revolutions. And what she essentially argues is that we are in the process of leaving behind this construct all of us know, which is mass production, cheap oil, suburbs, the car, the highway, that whole style of life, and that we're moving into a world where lifestyles are going to be very different, where it's all about health, it's about connection, it's about communities, and digitally enabled experiences and things that are much richer. But it's a really different sort of basis for what constitutes a good life. And what struck me as I was reading your book is so much of what you talk about, in which these older people are exploring and experimenting. They've done the mass production thing, and now they're almost at the vanguard of this new. We're building community. We're building things like Chip Connolly's Modern Elders Academy. I know you and I and Chip both share an interest in that, and he's great, by the way. And one of his favorite book chapter titles of all time, I in my opinion, is "I Only Have So Many F's to Give."
Right. Yeah.
But I wonder, is that perhaps what we're seeing? Because I think the trope, the sort of common belief is that, older people are stuck in their ways and they're looking backward, and it's how great the old days were. And your book suggests that's not at all the case, that these folks are actually carving out new territory because they've got the freedom and the resources to do that. And maybe they're actually the vanguard rather than the rear guard.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it. And we did a big national study on this very topic to examine. It was 50 to 70-year-olds. It was a couple of years ago. We wanted the early wave boomers in particular, and we wanted some of the Gen Xers that are coming up right behind them. And we did observe this, and we saw that this cohort that led us to naming them the Reimagineers are very much at the vanguard. And what the analogy I like to make is once again, the boomers, they were the activist generation. They were a generation that blew up a lot of things. They protested the war in Vietnam, which was very counter, intelligence of the country at the time. Sex and drugs and rock and roll, of course. They launched Earth Day. The largest collection of people ever in the history of America was on the birth of Earth Day, in terms of an awareness of environmentalism. They led the social movements, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, as we talked about. And what I like to say is this is their new movement. This is their new activism. Their new activism is, how do we live longer in dynamic ways, in healthier ways, in new kinds of ways? And they are building the model. They are those annoying boomers who always have to change it up, and they're changing it up. And so the health is the number one thing. And when you look at the landscape, it's really that generation that is experimenting with a lot of the new classes of drugs that I talked about, with diagnostics, with going to longevity doctors, which finding ways to enhance their lives in a healthier way, for sure. They are reframing community and co-housing. So, we were this thing of moving into a gated community of 55-plus-year-olds, I'm very opposed to as an idea, because it ghettoizes people in a place where it's all homogeneous, and they're all end up complaining about their aches and pains, and there's no diversity, intergenerational activity. What I love about New York City, where I live and where you live, is there's something called NORCs. I don't know.
Naturally occurring retirement communities.
Exactly. And in my building, there are people who are babies all the way up to 90-year-olds, and we all coexist, and we step outside and we're all coexisting, and that's healthy mind, body, and spirit. You've probably been reading about the co-housing developments that are being created now. Many of them, like Urbaneer, are building intergenerational communities so that if you want to live in an enclave of people around your same age, meaning not having kids yelling and screaming around you, you have a little enclave in the development, but you're part of a larger development of intergenerational activity. And that's really a great new model that's being developed. In Singapore, they have they're doing a lot in their urban planning infrastructure. So, for instance, a senior community center is housed next door to a nursing nursery school. So there's a natural, organic connection between the two. They have something now called the 3-gen flat, the 3 generations flat. So it's re-stimulating a model that used to exist years ago, where your grandparents and your parents and the next generations were all kind of right there, all living together and experiencing life together. Mm-hmm. And I think the front runners in this social movement are also beginning to rethink. And Chip has just launched a new initiative with the new co-housing. He kind of calls it the Golden Girls housing, where it's building a community of like-minded people in his New Mexico ranch.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, you can check that out.
One of the things that I don't have an answer to is this whole infrastructure we've got of, suburbs, and this construct of you commute to the city for your job, or you, even worse, you go to these suburban, the theory used to be you'd have this outpost of like GE, would have their headquarters in the middle of some suburb, and everybody would drive there and you'd park and you'd look out at trees and whatnot. But you were really kind of isolated from pretty much everything. You weren't in a city, and you weren't really in a town, and you weren't really in a village. And that whole suburban thing to me has kind of served its purpose. I mean, I look at my children, and they got no interest in living somewhere where they're chained to a car to do anything. And I just wonder, do you think this older generation is going to be reimagining what the suburbs even are?
There's a big trend happening, of course, and this is not new, but it's new in a different kind of way, that when people were in the city and then they moved out of a city to raise their kids in a suburb, and a lot of it was affordability and school systems and so forth, they're all moving back to the city. And, I think you're seeing a interesting influx of people. New York City's a very good example of that. Of course, you need money, you need some level of affordability, but there are many, many other cities that are affordable. I'm a native of Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh is a very affordable city. And in the city itself, there is enormous culture and sports, and there are 5 universities, and the city itself is an affordable place for people to live. And I know I was just talking to someone there that a lot of the reclaimed buildings in downtown Pittsburgh are now becoming residential, and a lot of the people moving in are people who are post-child rearing, 50 plus. So I think that cities also have to rethink their infrastructure in terms of accommodating this. And in New York City, I became very friendly with the New York City Commissioner on Aging, Lorraine Cortez Vasquez. I interviewed her in the book, and she led a really important initiative to bring 20 city organizations together to say, how do we make New York City more age-friendly for the future? 20% of the New York City population is 60 plus.
Wow.
That's going to grow to 25% in the next decade. So, how do we accommodate that kind of citizen with infrastructure and services and transportation and all of the and community? And so I think, what we don't have in our country is a federal plan for this aging population. Many states don't really address it. It's really happening in the best places on the local level, which is I touch on in the book as well.
Yeah, very interesting. So one of the critiques that I hear about older people, we've got a lot of gerontology, in our elections, in our governing bodies, and so forth. And one of the critiques that you hear is, oh, these people should really step aside and give way to a new generation, and we need new ideas. And this gerontocracy is just smothering a lot of the new ideas. What would your response be to that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm opposed to retirement age. I'm opposed to ageism in that definition. I think that on the electoral side, what I always say is, great, serve up the candidates that are alternatives. Serve up the younger candidates that are our alternatives. Get engaged in civic life. And so if there are better candidates who are of different ages, bring it on and let the people decide. So I think that what concerns me is when people start saying so-and-so is too old or the gerontocracy. I think it's really an ageist lens. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, it's one of the last accepted discriminations to be able to talk about, get rid of the old people. It's, no one, if you say get rid of the women, get rid of the Black people, get rid of the multicultural, get rid of this one, get rid of that one, it would be an outrageous. Mm-hmm. It would be an outrageous statement, but yet we let people talk about get rid of the old people. It's really ageist. Mm-hmm. Ageism. So I'm opposed to that argument.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Well, and I think there's also an argument that if you build your developmental path right, you can have the courage to go after new ideas. I mean, this is a point that Chip makes a lot, which is that, if you've got the confidence of having a long experience, you can actually have the courage to try new things rather than being sort of hemmed in by what the past brings you.
Yeah, I think, that's true. And that can happen in any sphere. It can happen in the academic world. It can happen in the research world. It can happen in the creative world. One of the people I interviewed for the book in a chapter on creativity was Paul Theroux, who is a writer in his mid-80s who has like 5 book deals in the works. And he points out that many creators, many painters, authors, sculptors throughout history did their best work when they were in their latter years. And I think a lot of that is you fine-tune your craft, right? You fine-tune your creative, whatever the creative path has been. And so I think that has application for all aspects of life, whether it's business or academic or whatever. So yeah.
So one of the things that we have kind of a mythology about is that new businesses are started by, tech bros in their 20s. And yet the data show a lot of new businesses are started by older people. I think the last statistic I saw was that I guess most businesses are founded by people that are 50 up, and many, many, many of them are women. Yes. And so I think a lot of our sort of taken for granted assumptions about how commerce works are really being upended by this kind of slow rolling demographic shift.
I write for Esquire and Men's Health and others. I wrote a story on this for Esquire that what is the counterattack to AI? Go out and start a business. If you're in mid-career and you're worried about the future, step out and become an entrepreneur. And to your point, the data shows that entrepreneurs in midlife tend to be more successful than any other cohort age. And it's because they have experience, they have knowledge, they have contacts. They either have money or access to money because of their experience. And they have the ability to pivot quickly because they, in running businesses, to your earlier point, they see what worked, what didn't work. and they can, turn on the dime as opposed to saying, I'm sticking to my idea. And so that is absolutely true. And to your point, many of them are women who are starting businesses in an entrepreneurial kind of way. So yeah, it's really a great path to take, a great idea to take.
Well, and I've been, just speaking of women, one of my good friends is a woman named Aviva Wittenberg Cox. You may have run across her.
As a matter of fact, you could be sisters. You remind me a little bit of Aviva. She's terrific. Yeah, she's great.
And one of the things she talks about, which fascinates me, is that, we talked about the traditional career path. And she said, for women, for a lot of us, we don't even get going till we're in our 50s, because there's all this other stuff that we got to deal with. And then you get to 50, 60, the kids are finally doing their own thing. And now you've really got the capacity to focus. And I've said for years that, if you really want to hire somebody competent to get on with things, I mean, women in their 50s, or older, we're not worried about the meaning of life. We could have done that. We have managed empires already, so we're not, we're disciplined about stuff. And I've always thought that was such an interesting, different way of looking at
completely agree. Completely.
Career structure could be.
It's so interesting you bring this up, because since Roar was written 4 years ago, the business was launched. We have over 50 companies that we work with. And, we have a membership group called the Roar Masterminds. That's a paid community who come to our events and get our content and so on and so forth. What I have found is that midlife women are the most engaged, dynamic, and interested in all of this second half of life reinvention. And to your point, if they've had children, they are now freed up. They have more time to pursue and do what they want to do. If they didn't have children and they are independent and professional, single and or married, they have the flexibility and elasticity. The woman who I mentioned who went to veterinary school, she's married. She has no children. It's a second marriage. Her husband has grown children, but it was his income that allowed her to be more flexible, and or vice versa. But women are just more, how would I put it, inventive of thinking about this. The poor guys, I think, are still stuck in their ways in terms of their linear thinking. And, hope that can change and evolve a bit. But I definitely see that it's women who are much more interested and engaged in this whole longevity conversation.
Well, I think a lot of the men were really socialized around, this you did this path, you did this thing, and then that's the structure that you were in, and so to have to kind of start with a blank sheet of paper. But so what do we do about the younger men, the ones that are not in income, not in what do they call it, NEETs, not in education, employment, or training? And there seem to be a growing number of them. And I find that kind of concerning, because how do they build the basis for this? If we're right, this could be an 80-year endeavor, a 90-year endeavor for them, and they're not really building the building blocks for it.
Yeah. I mean, one answer I would have to that is that, the culture, and this is a big conversation, as you're an academic, is that the pathway to future success is through college education and university education. And all the numbers show the effect of your income over a long life. And we know all that data. However, but not everyone is cut out to go to university. And we should honor and celebrate those who want to go to become plumbers and electricians and the trades and all of that element, because first of all, there's an incredible need for that skill set. And secondly, it is a really great profession that has a lot of demands and can have a really nice income that someone can have over a lifespan. So how do we stimulate for younger men and women, but we're talking about men, that there are lots of different options that you can do to build a successful life. And, going to a trade school is one of them. Becoming I always say that the IT technicians are the gods of our lives because they get on the laptop and figure it all out. And I'm like, I don't know how you did that, but, medical, there are lots of fields in the medical world where you don't have to go to college, but you can get other kinds of skill set training. So I think it's opening up the options and having them be validated by all of us, collectively, that this is a good path
Yeah. I think we went way too far down the rabbit hole of everybody's got to have a college degree.
Right.
It's silly. I mean, there are a lot of countries where that's not the case. Like there are jobs where you need that, but there are a lot more jobs where you don't.
Yeah.
So, oh my goodness, I'm looking at the time. What are some things you hope this book? So, just for those of you that are sort of laterally joining us, I'm here with Michael Clinton, author of Roar, and we're talking about his new book, Longevity Nation, where he's really talking about this massive inflection point of people who are living healthy, long lives, 100-year lives, well into the period past in history that's ever been precedented, and what that implies for business and society and our own life planning. What are some things you hope this book will lead to?
Well, I'm going to, in our remaining time, really talk about the personal level for people, because we've been talking very macro. And, the consistent studies are that only 25% of our genetics determine our personal longevity. There's a recent study that came out that's getting a lot of controversy that maybe it's 50%. But when I talk to doctors and epidemiologists and our medical advisory board for Roar, they all believe that it's 25% until many, 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 many studies come around and they change the thinking. So let's hold that thought. That means that 75% of your personal longevity is in your own hands. And regardless of your socioeconomic background, there are certain things you can do. This is not a rich person's phenomena. And that gets a lot of the airtime, that a lot of the longevity stuff is for the rich people. And some of that is true. But what I like to talk about are the 5 core longevity hacks and or protocols. And we talk about it in the book. Number one, I'll say number one again, is exercise and movement until the day you die. It is the natural medicine that keeps us healthy and keeps us mobile and brings down inflammation and all the kinds of things that are important. And ask any doctor and they will tell you that that is the most important thing. Figure out your regimen, do what works for you, but move every single day of your life in one way, shape, or form. The second thing is, of course, what we put in our mouths, what we eat, more plant-based. Many believe that meat should be an hors d'oeuvre, not an ongoing food intake. I haven't eaten meat in 50 years, so I'm not a meat eater at all, but that's my own personal. But more plant-based, no processed foods. You may have seen the recent report that ultra-processed foods now have a causal effect for early dementia. Just written in, I think it was in the Times recently. So eating less food, trying to eat 20% less food, also enjoy life. I love a margarita and Tex-Mex food too. So you have to be sensible about it. Sleep hygiene and the importance of sleep, the importance of REM sleep and deep sleep. Pharmaceuticals for sleep are bad. They disrupt you might think you're getting a good night's sleep, but it's disrupting your REM and your deep sleep, which is what you really need to clean out the garbage in your brain and to, get you well rested. And there's a whole chapter on sleep in the book. Purpose. This gets back to our earlier conversation. If you're 65 and you retire and you move to Florida to play golf, I'm being metaphorically speaking here, you can't sustain that for 30 years. You need more purpose in your life, and you need to figure out in your rewire. You don't have to go work full time, but you need to have other things that are going to give you purpose, meaningful purpose in your life. And then the last piece of that is really the relationships that you have, your partner, if you have one, if you want one, Some people say, I'm done. I don't want another partner. I've lived that life. Okay. But there are an enormous amount of opportunity to repartner, making sure that you have good relationships outside of your family unit. Relationships and community and connection oftentimes are one of the most important things for healthy longevity. And so those 5 protocols, anyone can adopt those and integrate those into their habitual life. Doesn't not necessarily take a lot of money. It just takes time and commitment. Mm-hmm. And that's how I would, wrap up the conversation today.
That's just wonderful. So how do people learn more? So you've got a business around this. You've got a membership group. You've got the book. You've got a website, I would imagine. You've got all kinds of things. How do people learn more?
Yeah, thank you. We're roarforward.com. We're mostly a B2B business, but we do have a community of people, many of them professional managerial types who are either working or rewiring or in different stages of their life. We do 4 or 5 events a year. We do a big summit all around longevity. We just had Dr. Daisy Fancourt. We had an event with her. You might know that name. She has written a book called Art Cure, that by participating in the arts or being a practitioner of the arts, it's good for brain health. And she would call it the new longevity hack. She was terrific. We had an event with her. So we have that membership community, and we have all sorts of content around the new longevity. They can take a look, and my contact's on the website. You follow me on LinkedIn. We do a lot on LinkedIn, and thank you for asking. And of course, buy the book.
Totally. All right. Longevity Nation by Michael Clinton. It has been such a pleasure to talk to you, and I am looking forward to the next 40 years.
There you go. We're together. Here we go. It's such a great pleasure to talk to you, Rita. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.